And the conclusion, and now we only had a small number, but the peninsula is pretty uniform. Conditions on the peninsula don't vary very much from one spot to the other. And we spent a lot of time and care in picking the sites to be the appropriate ones. So we were able to conclude quantitatively that there is a fairly significant influence of septics on Candlewood Lake. And just to underline what Nelson said earlier, we made this determination in concert with our professional colleagues. Larry was one of the professional limnologists. I think we had a dozen of those folks, or we had 20 meeting, I think, at the meeting. So this was kicked around by our colleagues as well. So beginning a consensus opinion. And the consensus is virtually what Neil said earlier, that removing septics from the area will enhance the water quality of the lake. And, excuse me? No, that's not on the screen. I'm sorry. I'm doing a little extemporaneous. So it will be on the website. Okay? So sorry. So so what Neil was saying is basically it will slow down the eutrophication process. Now, we did make estimates of precisely what that number would be.
Estimates and precise.
Okay, and here's the guidelines I would share with you. Clean good water is basically, you can't be over 10 parts per billion of phosphorus in the water. If you're 20 is really the maximum if you want, let me say, the mesotrophic level, which is, it's got a little tint of green in the, et cetera. Once you go over 20, and especially if you go over 30, forget about it. You're now in a highly eutrophic, and you're going to get the cyanobacteria harmful algae occurring. So that's the general guidelines, if you will. We estimated that septic influences, and we used the number of the number of Brookfield properties that drain into Candlewood Lake is 25% of the total of all towns that are within the Candlewood Lake watershed area. So Brookfield represents, a healthy percent, 25%. The Brookfield influence, that septic influence represents, if I remember right, 8 parts per billion. So we are now talking about septic influence is, of that 10 that you really want, is pretty healthy percentage. And we're not counting what's coming out of stormwater influence and other factors. Excuse me?
The number is 7.5 is short. That's the part per million has been that way many years. You say it's not correct.
Sir, excuse me, I'm not understanding your question, fully, but the point I'm making, which is correct, the report states that the influence of septics on Candlewood Lake is 8 parts per billion. I'm not talking about Candlewood Shores right here. I'm talking about septics from everybody that are in Candlewood, in the watershed. So in other words, the point being is that it's not an insignificant influence on the lake's quality. That's number one. Number two is that the groundwater aquifer, which is the water supply for Candlewood Shores, Arrowhead Association, and the other associations on the peninsula, is contaminated from septic. And in our professional opinion, the drinking water supply is 25% septic effluent. Okay, that's our best estimate. Okay, that's pretty significant. And nitrate, nitrogen, drinking water violations have occurred during the past, in 2017. Okay, the data now is that it's about 8 parts per million on nitrate, nitrogen. 10 is maximum. That's way too close. Any place that's over getting, what do you call it, septic influence. And guess what? said, there's obviously other issues of concern in wastewater besides nitrogen. So for those reasons, that's the second, if you will, leg of the stool. The third leg of the stool is really I'll just point to the Board of Health letter in which they have recommended that the peninsula be sewered for public health reasons. And what that means is that there's a lot of properties that cannot put in a code compliant system. And variances have to be made, et cetera, so it becomes difficult in that department. So those are the three conclusions for Candlewood Lake. One last thing on Candlewood Lake, and then I want to just summarize what we concluded on Dean and Pocono, is that Neil referred to the other significant factor in the Candlewood Lake's water quality is the influence of the sediment. Okay, and that's a very common attribute of lakes as they age. Okay? Well, the sediment is a legacy reflection. It reflects really what's happened over the past decades, etc. So, and it's our opinion that and it demonstrates, let me call it, I call it the death by 1,000 cuts, but the septic contribution has been small, perhaps per year, but it's accumulating. It's not going anywhere. It's sinking to the bottom of the lake, and it's going to come back. So I would urge you to think of these issues in a long time frame, because once a lake goes bad, it's extreme, especially this size of lake. Forget about it. The effort to recover is very significant. Now in Dean and Pocono, the key issues, and Nelson mentioned some of these. The area has a very high groundwater situation, which causes havoc for septic system to operate, which really usually causes public health problems because it's not getting the proper bacterial contamination. There's a healthy number of extremely small lots where you really can't put a code compliant, or the variances that are required are pretty significant. As well as the same situation, the Board of Health has concluded, based upon its work for decades, is that area needs to be sewered as well. And we agree, and the basis of that, again, is also in the reports. So with that, I will return the microphone to Chris. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. So again, a little bit of repetition, but hopefully briefly now. A little bit of project background and the current study areas and how we got here. In 2020, the Candlewood Lake Area Wastewater Management Plan was completed, and it recommended sewer extensions for the Candlewood Peninsula and certain high-density areas adjacent to Candlewood Lake Road. On this map, that's basically the red area, and the green area. In 2020, there was also a Dean and Pocono Roads Wastewater Management Plan completed that recommended sewer extensions for the Dean and Pocono Road area, that's east of this map. And then recently, we also added the Candlewood Lake Club area, the portion that's in Brookfield up here, just to look at how that compares to some of the other areas in the study. Overview of septic systems. As I said before, I'm sure everyone here knows plenty about their septic system, but I'll start with another reference to the letters from the Brookfield Health Department. Did recommend sewer extensions to the WPCA for the areas included in the study, basically the Candlewood Peninsula and the Dean and Pocono Road area. So that was a recommendation of the health department that kind of started some of this work. More than half the septic systems in these study areas are more than 50 years old. Most of them are certainly past their expected useful life. That's not to say that they're all failing right now, but they're no longer in a stage that you could really consider them reliable at age 50 plus. Many lots in the study areas are too small to have code compliant systems. A lot of properties have experienced malfunctioning septics and difficulty upgrading their systems. And in general, the soil and ground conditions in these study areas are not always conducive to nutrient removal in septic systems. So either the groundwater is too high, the lots are too small, bedrock is too high, not ideal conditions for properly functioning septic systems. I'll also note, I'm sure if anybody in the room has been through it, replacing your septic system is no small cost, no easy feat. Drain field replacement might be $10,000, it might be $50,000 if you need to do a mounted system. If you need to replace your tank, it could be $3,000 to $10,000. And that's the kind of thing you don't really have time to plan for. When it fails and you need to replace it, you need to do it pretty much immediately if you pay a contractor right away. So it's a hard thing to plan for and a hard thing to deal with. This slide has a lot of words, I know that. We just wanted to put out there some of the pros and cons of sanitary sewer systems. In general, sanitary sewers would improve the lake water quality, reduce the phosphorus discharges specifically to the lake. Also would improve the drinking water source quality of all the wells around our ambient study areas. Reduce risk of beach closures, elimination of the septic tank responsibilities on the homeowners. No need to replace them, get rid of that concern from your life. Increased property values associated with sanitary sewer service and public utility. Less residential maintenance costs. Sewers and community pump stations would be maintained by the Brookfield WPCA. And grinder pumps, which we'll talk about in a little bit, they have typical lifespans in excess of 10 years, usually much more than that. Gravity sewers, if they're installed, have very little maintenance and very long life cycles, 50 years, 100 years or more. Obviously, there are some cons to every project. Plenty of people have voiced some of those concerns. We understand them. Certainly, construction activity, putting a pipe down the middle of your road is not an easy thing to live with, so there's definitely disruption during construction. Wastewater treatment capacity needs is something we'll talk about on another slide. That's definitely an issue here in Brookfield right now. And then I think the number one con is the cost. Any capital improvement project for the town definitely comes with a cost, and everyone's concerned with that these days. It's a fair concern. So just to talk a little bit again about what we're looking at right now, and again to reiterate, we're in the planning study. This is, decisions have not been made. We're trying to get to a point where we have good information to help the WPCA and the town make decisions. We are summarizing the current flows through the Brookfield system and the potential new flows from these study areas as well as from other developments that may happen in town. Looking at existing treatment facilities and new in-town treatment options. There are some capacity limitations currently with where the wastewater currently flows. So expanding the system is not an easy thing to deal with. There's not an easy answer there. We also did some geotechnical explorations in the study area to identify things that we knew existed, but we didn't necessarily know always where. Where is there shallow bedrock? Where is there high groundwater? Try to quantify some of those ground conditions a little bit better. And we are looking at alternatives analysis for sewers. So, the 4 bullets here are kind of the 4 buckets of how you could design a sewer system for these areas. The first bullet here, these are in no order. The first bullet is the septic tank, effluent pumping, and gravity systems. I know a lot of people have read about them because they are mentioned in the prior reports. That is one option. It has not been determined yet. It's on here because it's still an option in consideration. We're trying to look at everything and make sure that we do a comprehensive report here and look at all the feasible options. Other options that we're looking at are typical, what you would normally think of for a collection system. So gravity sewers and pumping stations throughout the project area where needed, pumping stations at low points basically that would be maintained by the WPCA. Also an option to sometimes have a mix of gravity sewers and pumping stations, and some areas where homes have individual pumps to try to get up to a gravity sewer that's shallower than their home. And then we're also looking at an option that might have a majority of individual grinder pumps, so whole blocks that might have a whole bunch of pumps on them. I'm going to talk about them a little bit more on the following slide. The first one, again, septic tank, effluent pumping, gravity systems, the step seg systems were presented in some of those prior reports because it can be a low-cost option. And it's something that we have to look at in the range of capital cost planning. In this configuration, existing septic tanks would be maintained on the properties for solids, and then small diameter, fairly shallow sewers would be constructed in the streets. And there still would be some pumping stations in some of the communities depending Again, gravity sewers and Brookfield WPCA pumping stations. Gravity sewers, once they're in the ground, they just generally work for a really long time. You don't have to do a whole lot with them, so that's a big pro. But they can certainly be very expensive to construct, especially if you've got shallow bedrock or shallow groundwater and you're looking at some deep pipes. So this option also requires several pumping stations throughout the study areas, and it's not necessarily easy to find vehicles that work technically and also make the neighbors happy. So that is one option. That's a traditional option. The third bullet is a bit of a twist on that. So, basically gravity system with Brookfield WPCA pumping stations. But in some areas where you might have really deep gravity sewers, if you were to serve everybody by gravity, throw in 5 or 10 or 20 individual grinder pumps on some of the houses, some of the low-lying houses. You might be able to make the whole sewer system 10 feet shallower if you do something like that, which could save some cost. So we're looking literally at each street to see where it might make sense to do something like that. And then the last one, majority individual grinder pumps. So a grinder pump is basically where the wastewater would leave your house, and instead of flowing by gravity into the street, it would flow into a little can, almost like a garbage can buried in your lawn with a pump in it, and pump up to a sewer. There might be whole blocks where it makes sense to do individual grinder pumps. So that's something that's, it's an option. It's kind of an alternative to the step seg system to try to keep things shallower and smaller diameter pipe. So again, these are 4 options. In the end, the ultimate recommendation here, if the project is to go forward, is probably going to have some combination of 2 or 3 of these bullets. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I'm sure everybody here knows the topography of this area and the ground conditions are challenging. It's not as simple as just putting a pipe in the road and carrying the wastewater away.
Where's the sewer option in your own?
So we shouldn't be taking questions now, but ultimately this project has not been voted on yet. So the option to keep your own septic would stay if the project doesn't move forward. We're in a planning phase right now. So, right, no action alternative, right. So what we're working towards is a cost analysis of those feasible alternatives. So again, like I mentioned, deep gravity sewers are expensive to install, but once they're in, they're in. So where might it make sense to have deeper sewers to avoid a pumping station? Areas of shallow bedrock and groundwater complicate construction and raise construction costs. Again, looking at the cost of individual pumps in some areas versus another Brookfield WPCA community pumping station. I also want to mention the concept of capital costs versus long-term maintenance costs. Everybody's going to think about initially the capital cost of the project and is it palatable, is it affordable? But every time you're building new infrastructure, there are long-term maintenance costs. So pump stations and grinder pumps cost more to maintain than gravity sewers. So that's why the deep gravity sewers are still on the table and being looked at right now. And recommendations for the project, what's going to come out of this planning phase, we'll have some recommendations for what we think is feasible and makes sense. And they'll be based on a combination of cost and public input. So that's why we're interested in people's opinions and thoughts and understanding the considerations of the community. But we'll be weighing that against the technical feasibility and the costs of the project. And ultimately, to get to an implementation phase, if this project is to go forward, at the conclusion of the planning study, the Brookfield WPCA would make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and the Planning Commission. Do they think that this project is something that should be pursued by the town? And if that recommendation is yes, all the backup and phasing of the project would be presented. Ultimately, it would have to go to town meeting and a referendum vote that would be required before the appropriation of funds is authorized. So, again, this is a planning study. The decisions have not been made. We're looking at the information that we have to try to make the recommendations at this time. A quick note on project financing. I know it's certainly number one in everybody's book, like how would any project be implemented. A project of this type would be eligible for Connecticut Deep Clean Water Fund, which is typically a 20% grant and a low interest loan, typically a 20-year loan for the balance of it. There would be ongoing investigation into other grant opportunities, anything that could be found to lower that initial capital cost for the town. Grant programs are always changing. Sometimes the state has steep grants, there are federal programs. It's always changing. So depending on when this project may move forward, we would look at every opportunity available at that point in time. And then the remainder of the project would be paid for, the net cost of the project would be paid for by benefit assessments on the properties that are being approved by sewer service. Historically in Brookfield, those benefit assessments are less than 10% of the assessed value. That cost model is being evaluated for this project. It's something that the WPCA is looking at. It's possible that method might be modified to possibly include property acreage or frontage, or something like the number of building units and the use of the parcel. That's similar to what the town does for water main benefit assessments. So that, that 10% assessment is not necessarily a done deal at this point in time for this project. And again, that's the maximum. 10% is the maximum. It's not a standard. Basically, you take the cost of the project, subtract the grants, and figure out what it would be if it's divided up against the users. So, upcoming, what are we really looking at here? We're going to complete this analysis, look at all those alternatives literally on every street in the study area. Also look at the boundaries of the study area. Do they make sense? Are these the right boundaries? Flows and treatment options. Where can all this additional flow go? Can it go to Danbury? Can it go to another neighboring town? Do we have to look at a plant within Brookfield to handle this new flow or any other development needs in Brookfield? Cost analysis, again, consideration of the public input from tonight, from future meetings, from questions that have already been received. And we expect that we would have some preliminary recommendations and another meeting sometime in the spring. I think it's going to be a long winter of looking at each house and each street on maps and trying to make recommendations, and then be more prepared to answer more specific questions several months from now in the spring. So with that, we do have a public comment time. The WPCA has received, hundreds of questions, I believe, in the last few weeks at this point. And they published a living document on their website already with, I think everything that was received through a few days ago is already up there with preliminary responses. We are calling it a living document. We'll add to it when new questions come in. Some of the answers might be, they're vague at this point because decisions haven't been made, so we'll try to keep that updated. We do have a summary of responses to kind of the themes of the questions that were received. I think those were those handed out, it was available to be handed out, and we can go through those quickly to try to address what I think are, the overall themes of what many of the concerns are. And then after that, we can go to a public comment period, and Greg will moderate that. But so thank you for listening and keeping your ears open.
Okay, the only thing between your turn to talk and our turn to listen is just a couple more minutes, so just bear with me. So as Christy mentioned, we did, I think the final tally was 260 questions. Looks like there's a little more than 260 people here, so there could be more questions still to come, I'm guessing. But the answers, the preliminary answers, like she mentioned, are on the website. They're available for you to go through. We will continue to update them. Most of them have an answer on them that will be updated. Some of them still need an answer. But the handout is just what I wanted to talk through first, because what we went through is we thought that a lot of them fit in certain categories. And, so that when you come up, you can understand this is where we were when we put them into these categories. So the first one is related to the health of the lake and drinking water. And it's the only one I'm going to actually read, but given the density of homes in Brookfield near Candlewood Lake, the intent of this project was to evaluate alternatives for maintaining or improving the precious water resources for generations to come. I don't think anybody here would argue that you want to maintain Candlewood Lake and all the water resources within Brookfield. The question is the project needed? How much is it going to cost and all of those things? But I would imagine that, like the first select woman said earlier, if we did a show of hands, how many people want to preserve Candlewood Lake for generations to come? Can I get a show of hands? Okay. So the scope, Christie went through. We understand. The scope of the project, Christie went through, there will be a comment period just for 2 minutes, please bear with me. The schedule, Christie went over, we did get a 55% planning grant for the efforts to date. As Nelson mentioned, we have a 55% grant for the efforts that are going on now. So, 45% is the only portion that is being borne right now by Brookfield, so that is tremendous, and it's being funded by Connecticut DEP, and they are in full support of this project. And as Christie mentioned, we will have a lot more answers come the spring. We certainly will have another public meeting, and nothing will move forward until there ultimately would be a referendum vote to in fact move the project forward. There was a lot of questions, I think 3 pages of questions on the cost estimate. Trust me, we know that COVID happened. We know that inflation is going on. We know that the material costs are up. We know that all of these things are happening. The Lombardo estimates was before all of that occurred. We certainly are updating the alternatives now. We certainly will update the cost estimates, and in the spring when we present it to you, we'll have the current cost estimates for the current alternatives. There was a lot of talk about restoration. Now this is interesting because there was talks about costs, about it costing so much. But then there was comments about, are you going to do full road reconstruction? The cheapest thing to do would be to just do a trench patch, right? That'd be the cheapest alternative. This is not a road reconstruction project, but if what the community wanted was to at the same time get their road repaired, it probably would be a better overall solution, but it might be a more expensive solution. But those are the things that we can talk about through future public meetings. There was a lot of talk about construction means and methods. We are nowhere near this right now. We're only in the planning phase, and we don't know if we'll be moving forward with design or not, but certainly we will put the pipes below the frost line. We certainly will use the proper bedding material. We certainly will make sure that trenches will be maintained so that kids don't fall in them, that at night they will be secured. We certainly will make sure that people have access to their houses. These are all standard things in construction with pipeline. We've built plenty of pipes in plenty of towns, and this would be no different. On the septic reuse, Christie mentioned that. Certainly, I think she went through that pretty detailed. There was a lot of questions on, maintaining the existing septic system after this project, if it was built. We are evaluating other alternatives to that right now, and we will present them all to you in the spring. On the wastewater treatment and discharge capacity, we are aware of the situation. We are currently seeking out with Danbury and New Milford options to send wastewater there, and there obviously is options for an in-town wastewater treatment plant. We don't have the answers to those right now, but again, we hope to have them come the spring when we are presenting this to you again. On pumping stations, we don't know the locations. It all depends on, like Christie said, the layout. There's a give and a take. The more gravity sewers is the less grinder pumps. The individual pumps you need at your house, but it means that we probably need to do a pump station in the street that would be owned and operated by the WPCA. And we certainly would want to site them in a place that is not an eyesore. We can make them aesthetically pleasing, and they would have odor control systems. On final design and construction, we are not there right now. It would be a future phase after a favorable referendum if that was to occur. It would likely have multiple design and construction contracts. It would be over several years. And even if everything went as smoothly as we possibly could imagine and passed the vote, we're still looking 2-3 years away before any construction would occur. As to grant funding, the WPCA is always, Nelson is a champion of, he met with Commissioner Boughton to try to get infrastructure money for this project. He's constantly looking for opportunities for grant funding. Clearly, if we could increase that 20% grant to something higher through the infrastructure bill, through the community support, through people going to DEP or going to your state legislatures, if we can get money, more money for grant, and the cost for the project goes down for the entire community, and then you still get the benefit of preserving the lake. And I think that would probably be one of the best things for everyone. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Greg, and he is going to MC the public comment period.
All right, so before we get started on public comment, it's 7 minutes after 8. How many people are going to have a public comment, would like to make a public comment, just by show of hands? So we've got maybe 2 dozen, all right? You want to keep going, or you want to break? Keep going, okay. So let's set some ground rules for the public comment. So we're all kind of going by the same set of rules here. As was previously said, 260 questions have already been asked. The answers, as best we know them today, are on the WPCA website. You probably maybe haven't had a chance to read those questions or answers, but what we don't want to do is repeat questions more than once tonight. So if somebody asks the question, please don't come back up, for respectful of everyone's time, to ask the same question again. Any questions? So what we're going to do is kind of give a 3-minute limit, and I would ask all the speakers to come along this aisle and just kind of stand in queue, and you'll come up one at a time at the podium. And if you can give your name and address, Brookfield address. If you're not a Brookfield resident, can you please just state your affiliation? You know, you're here from another town representing so-and-so or whatever. We'd appreciate knowing that. We're not gonna, this isn't a public debate or a Q&A. These are public comments. So everyone here at the table is going to be listening carefully to your questions or comments. After all the questions are asked, we'll get up one at a time, and they'll each respond to the ones that are kind of in their area of expertise. So across the table, we'll stand up, they'll introduce themselves again, and they'll make general responses to the questions or comments that you all made over these next 20 minutes or so. So if that works for everybody, if we can't get to some questions tonight because we're going to be hitting 10 o'clock, I don't think we're going to do it. You can email your questions to the email address that Christy showed, or you can call them in, and that living document she talked about will be updated, I bet more than once over the next couple of weeks. So with that, if we're ready for public comment, can you please come along the, kind of queue up along that side aisle? And name and address, and 3 minutes per speaker max, please.
Hi, my name is Angelo Aldana. South Lakeshore Drive in Candlewood. Yes, okay. I have a lot of questions and comments. It's not going to be 3 minutes. I'll just try to hit the highlights. But I disagree, or not disagree, but I found many of the statements made earlier just factually incorrect. And if we had the time, I would point them out, but we don't have that time. Let me just start off with this one. Mr. Lombardo, the lake, your data on one of your reports show that it's less than one part per billion phosphorus. So I don't see how you come to your conclusions. The main comment I would want to make is, I don't know if anybody here has looked at a lake that's been in trouble like Bantam Lake. Is anyone familiar with that? Okay, so why wasn't that process taken care of, followed? Rather than the health department, 2 individuals writing a letter saying that they believe that septic systems were causing pollution, we need sewers, you hire a consultant who's, with all due respect, primarily involved with sewers and waste management. I looked at your website, your projects. And Bantam Lake followed a process that I think was very well thought out. They looked at all sources of pollution. They looked at runoff, they looked at agricultural, they looked at wildlife, they looked at erosion. There were 9 points in their plan. When they came through that plan, and they also looked at septic systems, you should look at the report. I think it'll conclude, everybody can look at it, it's on the DEEP website. Septics were less than 1% of the potential problem. Their main problems was runoff in that lake, and that's what they're addressing. So I don't know why this commission jumped right away that there was a problem when we didn't see a problem, and then that solution, it's a solution in search of a problem. Because sewers, if there was truly a problem with the lake, every single person here would be concerned and try to fix it. But I don't think that's the case. And the person from the Candlewood Lake Authority himself said this is a complex issue. It's not sewers. If you remove the septic systems, you're not going to have a major impact on the lake. You're just not. Runoffs, fertilizers, and a lot of other things. The Housatonic River dumps into the lake. No one's tested Housatonic River. We didn't test chlorophyll A, which is one of the problems that potentially closes the lake. So there are so many defects with this study, and so many conclusions that were not based on facts at all, that I just questioned why this authority jumped to sewers as a solution. Please answer those questions. because it's very significant. If you could show us that the lake was seriously polluted and that septics were the cause, not other sources which weren't looked at, I think everybody here would be very concerned about that. But we're not convinced or that that's the case. So I would urge you to look at that carefully, the Bantam Lake study, and answer us why it wasn't followed and how you accounted for other sources of pollution and concluded that all of a sudden it's septic systems that are the problem. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Deirdre Corey. I'm at 57 Skyline Drive. I just kind of have a series of questions that, you know, you'll take note of and hopefully answer at some point. Do any other towns that border Candlewood Lake have sewer for their lake properties? Will Brookfield, if we do build a plant, will we potentially sell our capacity to other towns? Has First Light or Candlewood Lake Authority or any other group initiated discussions for a cross-town kind of coordinated approach for sewer to achieve economies of scale? To the previous gentleman's point, has anyone addressed a study of when you show those two pictures in both, whichever year, the first year and the second year, Housatonic was solid red, and that's what dumps in through First Light into our lake. So why aren't we studying that? On the other image that you had, the red properties, and specifically the peninsula, that I'm assuming is going to be like the kind of the mandated area that will have to have sewer put in. I'm wondering if I and others in the public may have a spreadsheet copy of those specifically identified properties on that list. And by my take of looking at that, it looks like there were many properties that are near and bordering the lake that are not on the red, and yet there was red as far as pollution or runoff near their properties. Why aren't they in there? They need to share the burden. Is there any plan to address specifically the financial burden for residents that have fixed incomes? Because this will be like a mortgage for many people. At $40,000, 10% of the home value, that's very high. Hypothetically, if the Candlewood Shores Tax District, which owns their own roads, should say no, you don't have access to our roads, what could or would the WPCA do? Would you consider eminent domain, a taking, paying for that? As far as who benefits, we're assuming, okay, lake quality, we all want a good lake, but has anyone really looked at, why aren't we looking at everyone who benefits, everyone who uses the lake, all over the state? People from all over the state come to our lake. People from New York come to our lake, other towns who use the lake and border the lake. I'm wondering who might benefit. Maybe the town of Brookfield coffers. I really don't know this. I'm just speculating if we could start to sell capacity. And that's a good thing for the town, but not when it's just on my burden on my specific property. When you talked about the, if we do a WPCA plant, then all of Brookfield residents would benefit from access to more sewer capacity without having a big assessment. Vacant properties along the corridor for the sewer, they're going to really benefit from this. They're going to have the ability to build multifamily affordable housing when they have sewer capacity. Has any conflict of interest study been done on those owners? One more thing. Last comment, thank you. The 4 alternatives that were on your list, and someone did point out, it seems like you need a number 5, and you need to kind of not just say no action, but actually specifically do a cost analysis of why don't we identify any problems with failing sewers, or septics, I'm sorry, and there are ways to do, with those, the sewer on smaller properties. Why don't we do a very specific analysis on just maintaining the septics that we have? Because many of them are not working. Thank you very much.
I live in the best neighborhood. I got the smartest neighbors. My name is Todd Dawson. I live on North Lakeshore Drive in Brookfield. I have two questions, not really profound statements like Deirdre did, but can we change over to that aerial picture slide of the blue water lake versus the phosphorus water lake? Would that be possible? I just have a question about that one image. And I think it speaks to the whole concept of, gee, what is this phosphorus problem? So I'm looking here at the phosphorus on the reservoir on Route 37. That's a reservoir, that's a watershed area that's protected, and no septic, no fertilizer, no nothing is supposed to run into that. And it's as bright green as Candlewood. And so it begs the question for me is, where is that phosphorus coming from? And do we really have a Candlewood Lake sewage septic problem? Or do we just have a summertime water problem and the phosphorus rears its ugly head when August comes around? I don't know, that's my question. My second question is, I've been in Candlewood Shores now for 28 years. I know the previous owners and the previous owners and the previous owners of my house. And I know that we've visited the whole question of pump-up systems. I live on the lake front, so I live below the street grade. And we visited this 50 years ago. Should we have sewers and should we pump up? Nobody believed that you could pump poop up a hill and get it into a sewer line. And so it was soundly defeated 50 years ago. Well, now we know that it can happen. It's a feasible, plausible, practical solution. But why are we only pumping 1/2 of our sewage? Why, if we're going to pump out of our yards and get all of the stuff away from our houses, why are we not pumping solid waste along with the liquid waste?
Hello, my name is Gail Strickler. I live on Arrowhead Road in Arrowhead Point. I have lived here for 39 years. Luckily, Deirdre asked most of my questions, but I have 2 points that I want to reiterate. One of them she alluded to slightly, which is the idea that we've been told several times tonight that there are multiple septics that are failing along the lake. Well, let's repair them. Let's take a fund. Let's come up with engineered septic, which we all know is possible now, and make those compliant. To tell me they're not compliant, so I should literally dig up all of our streets, cost me $100,000, etc., it just seems absolutely insane. Second of all, I really wonder what we are doing here without the people of New Fairfield, Danbury, of the lake, and we're here being told we're literally going to mortgage our houses when the rest of the lake isn't even represented. This is insanity. This is something that is Brookfield. So the idea that all of us, that I and my neighbors are here worrying about the value of our homes, to say nothing, by the way, of if this happens, what happens to the value of your waterfront home or your lake property home versus the properties in New Fairfield and New Milford and Sherman that aren't going to have their streets dug up, aren't going to have to mortgage their houses. So not only can you live through this, pay for it, but you can also watch the value of your house go down. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
John Lepler, Longview Drive. I'll be very brief. I just have a question about the stormwater. We keep talking about septic tanks, septic fields. What's the parts per billion for the phosphorus levels? Have you studied that? And have you discussed, instead of trying to take care of the septic problem, just worried about the stormwater problem, runoff? Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Mono, 7 Longview Drive. I've lived there for 55 years and 7 months. I gotta say, it was a really good map, except for one thing, you only show it from a year apart. What was the water like 50 years ago, 40 years ago? I remember, because I was there, that every summer, Candlewood Lake would get so choked with algae and Eurasian milfoil and all sorts of plant life that you couldn't even operate a boat in large sections of the lake. Now it's clear as a bell. Okay, that's one thing I noticed. One way. Second, it's very interesting. You guys at the engineering, subject engineering, you didn't even have the alternative for, you said, repairing septics, ameliorating, ending fertilization on the lake. It was all just septic. So you have to hit us with, as I said, $40,000 a new mortgage on our lake, or on our properties. Correction. But doing lower cost means to ameliorate the issues that there was. Like I get, but do we need them? I'm not even sure we need that because, as I said, the lake is better today than it was 40 years ago. Not worse, better, much better.
Good evening. My name is Barry Bernstein. I'm actually up here from Nashville, Tennessee to visit my daughter at 136 North Lake Shore Drive. Couple of comments, technical comments on the
If
lake.
you want, I'll have a video for you this meeting too.
Diagram
Yeah.
put up.
Yeah.
Blue side looked like it was about 0 to 2 parts per billion of phosphorus. The green side looked like it was around 20 parts per billion of phosphorus, and that was proffered as an indicator that the change was entirely due to septics, unless I misunderstood that. Well, if you look at your task 2 report, the needs analysis, the total impact to septics from all the septics around the lake is only 8.8 parts per billion. I think Mr. Lombardo referred to that. Of that, only 2.2 parts per billion is attributable to septics in the study area. So if the total lake septics are only 8.8 parts per billion, how'd you get from 2 parts per billion to 20 or 25 parts per billion? So it says to me there's a lot more going on than just the septic contribution to phosphorus. And with respect to the comments from the last gentleman, if you look at the phosphorus data in the report and chlorophyll egg data in the report, combined with the Marcicano paper, the historical account of water quality changes, the chlorophyll has actually improved quite a bit over time, to the gentleman's point. The epilimnitic total phosphorus is about the same, and the hypolimnitic has improved quite a bit. So that combined with the fact that there were only 3 septic sampled, there wasn't any upgrading monitoring done. I think there was a comment in some of the board minutes that there was limited funding, which limited the amount of monitoring you could do. You may be making some decisions based on very limited data. My comments.
My name is Dave Swooty. I live on Candlewood Lake Road. And I was asking where I live is rock. Actually very, very expensive to have pipe. So how would the people afford that? I know you can gotta go to 20 years of borrowing money, you know. Would I be able to get any help from the state? I just want to know. Because I don't want to lose my house and live in the street. That's my age. Thank you very much.
I live at 18 South Lakeshore Drive. I was here, not here, but at the town hall 4 years ago the same, pretty much the same people. It was an informative meeting about the sewers, or the potential sewers in the peninsula or the Candlewood Lake area. And it was a question and answer. I was quite thrilled though, as a Canadian. There was a gentleman there from Waterloo University, and he was an engineer that worked on septic systems on lakefronts that were highly efficient and that you didn't need sewers. And there was all these screens and showing this amazing guy that was an engineer at Waterloo University, and I was like, wow, maybe this sewer thing will go away. Maybe there is another alternative. Maybe there is septic systems that are efficient, that work well on lakefronts, all through Canada, all through the United States, and we don't need sewers. And it was an option that was paid for in this study that we ran out of money. I guess we ran out of money on the study, but anyway, I was looking forward to seeing that guy here again, but he's not here. So just wondering where he went.
Good evening. I'm Joe Vovas. I live at 18 Arrowhead Road. I'm the president of the Arrowhead Homeowners Association. I had a question specifically for Tara to address later. We at the Arrowhead leadership, as well as Candlewood Shores leadership, and the two other lake associations, Candlewood Orchards and Hickory Hills, did have the opportunity to meet with Nelson and Tara earlier this year, both in February and in April. One of the topics that we raised was the point that was just raised earlier, which is why is Brookfield leading the charge when there are 4 other municipalities around the lake? One of the topics that had come up, which Tara actually alluded to at the front end of this conversation, was unified conversations with those other municipalities, discussions about how we can do this cooperatively. Nothing has been said here tonight in any detail about that. Former Mayor Mark Boughton, who is now the State Economic Development Coordinator, is in charge of doling out over $5.6 billion in IIJA federal infrastructure funds. If you don't think he knows about this lake and what's going on, I'd like to know a little more about the conversations that have been had between the 5 leaders of the municipalities around the lake right now and Mayor Boughton, what the potential is for those funds. I don't think there's anyone in this room who would have raised their hand earlier when some gentleman said, who's for saving the lake? Okay, got it. We'll all sign this up. Who wants to pay for it is a totally different answer. If there is a way to parlay these funds, which are sitting there ready to be earmarked, into this project, I'll take some torn up roads for a short period of time and cover virtually the entire thing. So can we please get an update on what the status is? And I really find it strange that this was completely vacant from the conversation here tonight.
My name is John Bevilacqua. I'm at 3 Bacon Drive. So I have a couple of comments and questions. So I came out tonight to be informed and gain knowledge about what's going on, and it seems like I've repetitively heard you can find it on the website, which is great, but these meetings are informative and not many of us have a whole lot of time to look on the website. So I would ask that future presentations be thorough and have all the information to us available. We know a whole lot about the lake, that's for sure. We know that the lake is being contaminated by the Housatonic, right? GE and the Industrial Revolution of the 30s and the 20s and the 40s. And we're pumping that water in every day. Can we bring up this slide, please? First one. Todd made a fantastic comment. So we had the presentation on the slide, and we tried to ask questions when it was up there, but there were really no answers. There's not a lot of data that you were able to give us about when, how come, why. You know, it was 3 days of rain. What year? It's on the website. Exactly. And it was 10 years ago on the website. We're here to be informed today, not from 10 years ago, not on the website. So when we have our next meeting in 2023, we would expect that the information is here, not on the website. So, I think I know why the weed growth is down too. Like, I'm not sure that it's a definite, but we had no rain this summer at all and no fertilizers into the lake, right? So the weed growth problem is likely related to the fertilizers. No question. I'm really interested in everything you have to offer, but to me it's a sales pitch. You know, I don't want to hear a sales pitch. We want to fix the lake, which is the real problem, but we don't want to hear a sales pitch.
I might have to.
And the other question I would have is, when do we plan on having a decision? Like, is this 2025? Like, when? You know, I understand 2023 is a big year, but are we talking 2 or 3 years after that? Because I think a lot of people want to know when they're going to sell their property.
My name is Jerry McStravick. I've lived in Brookfield for 50 years. This lake question has come up a number of times, and nobody really had a solution. But I can tell you for one thing for sure, that the first thing I think, Terry, we could have done is Brookfield to take charge and be the only town to address this problem. That is not the way Candlewood Lake is 12 or 28 miles long. If there's a problem, let's have the 5 towns take care of it. Before we spend any more money, let's get the towns together on this project, as well as the Chamber of Commerce, because there's a lot of marinas who are making a lot of money, and we're getting a lot of boats from different states coming here using Candlewood Lake and polluting it without any revenue coming back to the towns. Let's get real for it. I don't know about anybody sitting here, but if I was in a corporation and some division came to me and said, we're taking this on our own without consulting with the other divisions or the other towns, I'd say it's bizarre. Spending all money when the Candlewood Lake is 28 miles long and it's a regional problem and in fact a Connecticut problem. I think the governor should get involved. This is a real serious situation, and I can tell you every action has a consequence. So be careful to go forward with something that may be ill-advised. I think I heard the man from Candlewood Lake Authority say, there's no guarantee if we do this, it's going to improve the lake at all. Now, if I was at the board of directors and somebody said, well, what was the condition of the lake 50 years ago compared to now? And if the results were 10 times better, then I'd say, what are we doing it for? So I think we have to start digging into these details quite more before we spend any more money. Thank you.
Scott Hartman, Arrowhead Road. We were told tonight that there's a significant buildup of sediment at the bottom of the lake. We were also told that septic systems probably add to that sediment, but it's known to carry over from year to year. Yet, at no point tonight did I hear any discussion of whether dredging that sediment is a feasible solution to this problem, albeit at a much lower cost. Secondly, I would just like to take exception with one point made tonight, that a pump-up system is essentially a garbage can with a pump that grossly underestimates or understates the cost of installing those as well as maintaining those. And I don't think that's fair to homeowners.
Hi, I'm Mark Vaserka. I have property in the Shores on Candlewood Lake, a couple over there, and 2 other properties in the town of Brookfield. Candlewood Lake originally was built as a hydroelectric lake. It wasn't built for recreation. That's just the point I'm putting out there. What happened to me in Carmel, New York, I had some property, and I had to put a sewer hookup. It cost me $50,000. Every year thereafter, it's $5,000 as a sewer fee. Be careful, we will get hit with that. I've been told Danbury is at capacity already. So they're talking maybe Danbury. I heard it's at capacity, they can look into that. You ever hear a bait and switch? I feel like they might be asking us to fund maybe another sewer treatment plant that could house all the developments on Federal Road. There's more and more condos, buildings down there. Where are they putting their sewage if Danbury is full? Nobody knows. So maybe we want a new treatment plant somewhere local where the whole town can enjoy it, and we can continue to do that. And not just pin it on everybody and use Candlewood Lake as an scapegoat and say, you people have to start funding this and start pushing it through the town. Right now is also the worst possible time ever to try to purchase and do something like this with the supply chain in this country and the prices of everything. It would be astronomical. If this is a project that's to be done, which in some ways is not a bad idea to have sewers, but it really should be kicked down the road until this country gets back on its feet.
Bruce Alexander, North Lake Shore Drive in Candlewood Shores. Please excuse my shaky voice, my shaky hands. I have essential tremor. It's just not nerves, okay? As a matter of fact, I've spoken in front of many groups before I had this problem. So, I'm used to speaking in front of groups. My big problem with this whole meeting is the format. The format is we all line up, we give our questions out to the audience and the panel, and we don't hear the answers right away to each question. We have to wait until the end, try and remember what the questions were, try and take these people's words that they got all the questions and that they will give us all the answers before 10:30 tonight. I can't remember that one. I can't even remember what I just said. But the question, the final question I have is, will you please answer all these people's questions? Thank you very much.
He's a tough act to follow. I'm Adele Bernicki. I'm at 13 Lakeview Drive in the Orchards, and I also have property in Candlewood Shores. Now, I know they spoke about grants. It should not be confused. The grant money that they got, 55% paying for this study, and 45% will be on us if this project goes through. But the grants that former Mayor Boughton is overseeing, which is $5.4 million. It's part of the infrastructure, $1 billion. It's part of the Infrastructure and Job Act. This project was already put in for that grant, And out of 100, a score of 100, where 100 means you're going to get the grant, we got like a 6. And you know what? So we're not going to get a grant because all the money was spent before it got down to 6. It was spent before it got down to 12. So no one's talking about that. So I think that there's very little chance that we would get any grant money for this project at all, given that they're giving it more to big municipalities or to small rural areas. Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is Joe Grimes, and I live on Horse Hill Road in Brookfield. I have a couple of questions. One is, we've heard that there's 55% of the money for this study came from a grant. I'm assuming that the rest of the money comes from the WPCA. And I don't think the WPCA gets any tax money from our regular tax rolls. Tell me if I'm correct or not. Which would mean that they're subsidizing the fees from the current users to do a study. I wonder if the current users know that. Number two, I look at the scope of the study, and I think that before you start into the intricacies of how we're going to pump this neighborhood, how we're going to pump that neighborhood, resolve the issue of where the sewer is going to go when we're done. You have given us 3 alternatives. It's going to go to Danbury or go to New Milford, or we're going to build our own plant. Before you do any of the rest of this study, settle that first.
I live at 43 Berkshire, arguably one of the smallest houses in Candlewood Shores. I've lived there for 2 years. I have a bone of contention with that. I just heard about this project, this everything else, whatever we're calling this. When my house, this road in front of my house was dug up as part of this study. And when we started talking with our neighbors, not very many people knew about it. And to answer the selectwoman's question, I vote at every election. I work the polls. I am an informed citizen. But yet, this is hush, 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 hush. And I happen to be in the red area that's affected. My house, I purchased for $240,000. It was already assessed for more than $100,000. Excellent, great for taxes. What happens when people, young and old, are on fixed incomes and can't afford this? There are so many unanswered questions. I came here, like probably everyone here tonight, for answers and for an education on this matter. And I feel like we're being sold something that doesn't even seem that beneficial or necessary. We need transparency. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Bruce Goldson, 94 North Lakeshore Drive. And my only comment would be that I believe that the process that you outlined on this project is that at some point, if it's approved by the WPCA and the town selectmen and whoever else has to approve it, it goes to a referendum. And that referendum goes to all of the residents of the town of Brookfield. So if I live outside of this project area and I'm told that this is a great thing to preserve our lake, I'm voting yes. But if I live in the area where I'm affected by it, my vote is less valuable than everybody else's vote. It's just one amongst many. So even though that may be the law, it doesn't seem very moral or ethical for an entire town to vote on a project that is only being assessed to a certain very small group of people for the greater good. So that would be my biggest concern with this project. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Julie Blick. I live at 130 Candlewood Lake Road. I might be the only person here who needs the sewer line in front of my house. I have a very tiny home. I need a bigger septic system. I I've had Mr. Grimes out to my property and I live on a ledge. However, my property isn't in the study list of properties. So I'm just wondering if that is flexible. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tara, but I do believe that you've been speaking with the first selectmen of the various towns, and the other towns will be involved in this project. It's not just Brookfield paying for it. I work in Brookfield, and I hear
Okay, any more questions? 10 to 9, we're going to keep going. So what we're going to do next is a couple of things are going to happen. You're going to get responses across the table. We'll let those that are ready to come up tell you again who they are. And every question tonight and answer is going to be uploaded in our Q&A, I believe. So for those that aren't here, you'll get responses. That'll be on the website again in writing. So with that, who would like to go first?
Okay, so there's a couple of things that I've been just chomping at the bit to get after, and I'm glad I had another opportunity to speak. Otherwise, I guess I'd have to answer these off the website. But first of all, Governor Lamont paid me a visit a couple of months ago, and I invited him back to the lake specifically. Okay, I'll keep my comments to 3 minutes if that's your request, sir. Anyway, I was saying Governor Lamont came, I invited him back to the lake, and he has yet to return. On the past referendum, I will say, when I've invited him again several times to remind him that somebody should be paying attention to the lake. Commissioner Dykes being one of them, Commissioner Boughton again. There is a much larger problem that we're all aware of, which is the flow and the capacity to Danbury. New Milford is potentially a bridge too far. It's way up north. Bethel has some excess capacity. Again, Matt Knickerbocker's now departed. I have to wait for his replacement to come on board to even address that. I had lunch with Pete Bass yesterday. He has extra capacity, ma'am. I'm looking for solutions to our problem, which is we have nowhere to send our flow. So, for example, if we were to sewer Miss Blick's house, I'd have nowhere to send it right now. And that's a problem that I've inherited, which I'm working towards. But I want to thank you for volunteering to work the polls and everything, and I appreciate all volunteers across town. If anybody would like to step up and be on any of our boards, commissions, run for elected office, be an appointed official, be assigned to an ad hoc committee, come on, we need everybody. Volunteers are great and they're really hard to find nowadays. So thank you, ma'am, for your volunteerism to the elections. What I'm getting at is reach out to your elected officials, Governor Lamont being just one of them, and let them know that, we need their help here. Candlewood Lake is the largest lake in Connecticut, and when the IIJA funding for the infrastructure money was first announced, I was the first one to go and say, how do I write that grant? I was on board, ready to go. We're not a deprived community, so we fall to the bottom, okay? And someone earlier had a question about affordable housing, if zoning rules were opened up, and I want to speak quickly to the landscape of the 5 surrounding lake towns, which most of you know. Brookfield has the highest density, right? We have a shoreline that is very, very different from the other 4 towns. New Milford, New Fairfield, Danbury, they have a lot of palisades. There aren't a lot of homes crowding the shoreline. We have acreage and mileage of a very, very different landscape. We have 3 restaurants, 3 marinas. We have the Shores Peninsula that jets out into the lake. We have just a very, very different, complex kind of problem set than these other surrounding towns. And I have been working with the other elected officials. Excuse me? When I was a child, even though there was more milfoil, I would argue that it was cleaner. Just because there's no milfoil doesn't mean that it's cleaner. So I'm not a scientist, I don't know. As I said when I spoke earlier, I'm trying to learn myself. Yes, I would agree we do need data for that. And there was a gentleman who mentioned about, I forget what his comment was, but I was thinking, about the voting, going to referendum. you know, I think about our form of government, which I alluded to earlier, town meeting form of government. For school security, which is important to many, many families across town, to others it's very insignificant. But for the 200 people who showed up that night, the vote was split by 18 votes. So, you know, that's our form of government. How do we change that? I'm kind of exploring those options myself, which is why I'm encouraging people to get involved. If you feel very strongly about a matter, please stand by your convictions and stay engaged and stay informed. To someone else's point about transparency, it's very, very hard to communicate across the board. To send mailers out, I mean, I don't know, how much did it cost the WPCA to send the mailers to all these homes just for this meeting? A couple $1,000s? When I was campaigning, it cost tens of thousands of dollars to send a mailer to 18,000 households, or 18,000 families, over 8,000 households. I have a website where I try to convey. I maintain my own social media site on Facebook if you want to follow me. Every month I contribute to the spotlight that you can sign up for on the website. Again, I respond to every constituent's inquiry. Please feel free to email me, call the office. I will return your phone call. Come visit me. I don't know how much more transparent I can be when I'm trying to be fiscally responsible, and I can't afford a chief of staff. I can't afford a PR. If somebody wants to run against me and try to do my job next year, come on. I also want to mention to the grant. I personally wrote a grant through Senator Murphy's office to try to get funding for our dilapidated 1986 communication system that fortunately was passed in the referendum. It's going to cost us about $5 to $6 million. Senator Murphy's office denied us a single penny. I'm trying to speak to the point about the grant because someone else mentioned and asked about the grant money. It's very unlikely that we will get the grant money we need to address this situation. If anybody has any recommended solutions, please bring them forward, and I'm happy to discuss anything, and I look forward to recommended solutions. But again, I'm also in the learning process, and I understand your angst. That's all I can say.
Anybody else want to come up? We got a few unanswered questions yet. Nelson?
Well, a couple things.
Have a good night, guys.
Luckily, we're just pursuing this
Not at all.
with diligence in order to do be sure that we have a good environment for the future. A couple things. One is that we had the biggest lake in New Jersey, Lake Apacon, had sort of the same situation. A lot of houses along the lake. And in 2019, it was a complete disaster. It turned to the cyanoalgae. If a dog went in the water, came out, licked its fur, it would die. And so they couldn't let anybody in the water, and as a result, anybody relying on rentals for paying the mortgages went belly up, and businesses shuttered. And anyway, that story's on the website. It's all over. It's all over the Lake Apacon website. Anyway, what happened was when they didn't use the lake for a year, and the sewers weren't active, the lake cleaned up, and it was able to be used the following year. In Lake Kenosha, they sewered a trailer park right along the lake there, and when they did that, the lake went from turbid to, you could see the bottom, just about. So anyway, it was, these are examples of what happens when you remove the septic from going into the lake. As far as the other towns are concerned, it's difficult because it's a multi-jurisdictional lake. There's Candlewood Lake Authority, the First Lake, there's
So the answer is no, no one else is involved.
and there's others that have jurisdiction over the lake, Connecticut did, and so to get everybody together,